banished to a living tomb, trapped between towering emerald cliffs and the unforgiving expanse of the Pacific Ocean. A place where the law of men dictated that those who entered would never return. In the mid-19th century, a terrible shadow fell over the pristine beauty of the Hawaiian Islands. It was a plague that stripped away flesh, tore families apart, and condemned the afflicted to the most agonizing of human sufferings: total, irrevocable isolation. They called it the separating sickness. The world called it leprosy, and the kingdom's response was swift, terrified, and merciless. Men, women, and children, bearing the first fatal marks of the disease, were hunted down, torn from the weeping arms of their mothers, husbands, and wives, and thrown onto the isolated shores of the Kalaupapa Peninsula on the island of Molokai. It was not a hospital or a sanctuary. It was a graveyard for the living. A desolate, lawless strip of land where the forgotten were left to rot, without governance, without medicine, and entirely without hope. On this absolute edge of the abyss, where despair suffocated the breath of the condemned and human dignity seemed to wither away alongside the dying flesh, Providence was preparing an unexpected response. It would not be a grand fleet of learned doctors or a wealthy philanthropist with coffers of gold. It would be a young, sturdy peasant from the quiet, devout fields of Flanders, Belgium. A man who had crossed the oceans not to conquer lands or seek fortune, but to conquer hearts for Christ. He was not forced into this hell. He chose it. When the bishop asked for volunteers to minister to the outcasts, knowing full well it was a virtual death sentence, this young priest stepped forward without a single moment of hesitation. This is the story of Joseph de Veuster, known to the ages as Father Damien, the story of a man who willingly walked into the darkest valley of the shadow of death to embrace those whom society could not bear to look at, of the healthy man who became an outcast to give the condemned a reason to live, of the priest who stepped onto an island of absolute despair and with his own hands transformed it into a blazing beacon of divine sacrificial love. Born in the serene rural heart of Belgium in 1840, Joseph de Veuster was a young man of the earth. Raised on a farm in Tremelo, his hands were calloused from the plow, his shoulders broad, his stamina forged by relentless physical labor. Yet, beneath the rugged exterior of a farmer beat the heart of a mystic. While his father envisioned a future of prosperous harvests and a quiet, respectable family life, Joseph heard a different call echoing through the quiet fields. It was the irresistible voice of God, asking for everything. He traded the security of his family's farm for the austere habit of the Congregation of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, taking the religious name Damien. He did not seek comfort. He sought the cross. When his older brother, Pamphile, a fellow priest destined for the missions in the Hawaiian Islands, fell gravely ill with typhus, Damien did not hesitate. He wrote directly to the superior general, begging to take his brother's place. The request was granted. Without a backward glance, the young novice boarded a ship, bidding a final, silent farewell to the shores of Europe, knowing deep in his bones he would never return. He arrived in Honolulu in 1864, a vigorous, passionate young missionary. For 9 years, he poured his immense energy into the sprawling parishes of the Big Island, building churches with his own hands, riding horseback across treacherous volcanic terrain, and learning the melodic language of the native Hawaiians. He became a spiritual father to a people he had come to deeply love. But across the waters, a shadow was growing. The horrific leprosy epidemic was tearing through the islands. The government, panicked by the incurable, disfiguring contagion, enacted a ruthless decree. The law was absolute: capture the infected, sever them from their families, and banish them to the Makanalua Peninsula on Molokai. A sheer, impenetrable cliff face over 2,000 feet high walled off the peninsula from the rest of the island, creating a natural, inescapable prison surrounded by a violent sea. The stories filtering back from that isolated hellscape were apocalyptic. The sick were often thrown overboard into the crashing surf from passing ships, forced to swim for their lives or drag their decaying bodies to the unforgiving shore. There were no doctors, no adequate shelter, no law. The strong preyed upon the weak. The dead were left unburied, their bodies ravaged by feral animals. It was a place where drunkenness, despair, and unimaginable misery ruled supreme. It was the ultimate exile. The Bishop of Honolulu, tormented by the spiritual abandonment of these exiles, knew he could not order any priest to go to such a place. He asked only for volunteers to serve on a rotating basis, hoping to spare any single man from bearing the full, crushing weight of the horror. Damien, hearing the agonizing, silent cry of the abandoned, stepped forward. He did not ask for a temporary assignment. He did not ask for an escape route. He asked to stay. He asked to give his life to those who had already been declared dead. On the 10th of May, 1873, the steamship Kilauea dropped anchor off the treacherous coast of Kalaupapa. When the 33-year-old priest stepped from the longboat onto the volcanic shore, he brought with him nothing but a breviary, a crucifix, and the clothes on his back. He had no house waiting for him, no hospital to work in, and no strategic plan other than absolute surrender to the will of God. The scene that greeted him was not a community, but a living nightmare. The air was thick with the suffocating stench of rotting flesh and the heavy, palpable weight of absolute despair. Wasted figures, their faces disfigured and limbs missing fingers, dragged themselves from wretched, makeshift huts to stare at the stranger. They did not welcome him with hope, but with the hollow, suspicious gaze of the damned, of those who had been entirely forgotten by the world. Here, on this island of the living dead, a heartbreaking phrase ruled the land. Aol kanawai makea wahi. In this place there is no law. There were no police, no courts, no moral codes. It was a brutal survival of the fittest. The strong preyed mercilessly upon the weak. Illicit alcohol, fiercely brewed from the Thai root, fueled long nights of desperate debauchery among those who knew they had no tomorrow. The bodies of the dead were often thrown into shallow trenches, left to be ravaged by feral pigs and wild dogs. Faced with this abyss of human degradation, any ordinary man would have turned and fled back to the ship. But Father Damien was not an ordinary man. He did not begin his ministry with lofty moral sermons or harsh rebukes. He began with his hands. That first night, having nowhere to sleep, he curled up beneath the sprawling branches of a pandanus tree, resting his head on a stone, surrounded by the haunting moans of those dying in the darkness. He made his very physical presence his most powerful declaration of faith. I am here, and I am not leaving. The next morning, the apostles' work commenced not at an altar, but at the refuse pits and the graveyards. Recognizing that human dignity must be restored before a soul can be truly reached, Father Damien took up a hammer and saw. He began building proper wooden coffins for the dead. He dug graves with his own blistered hands, organizing solemn funerals and reciting prayers so that those who had been discarded in life would be honored in death. He walked into the dark, bug-infested huts, using his bare hands to wash away the filth from bleeding wounds, bandaging necrotic flesh, and spoon-feeding those who no longer had the strength to chew. The stench of the disease was so overpowering that he was forced to constantly smoke a pipe just to hold back the nausea, yet he never once turned his face away in disgust. For the lepers, who had grown accustomed to being stoned, chased away, and utterly loathed the gentle, fearless touch of this priest was the first true miracle they had ever witnessed. He did not look at them as walking corpses. He looked at them, and he saw the crucified Christ. In the dirt and the blood, the insurmountable chasm between the living and the dead, between the healthy and the outcast, was obliterated by a love that knew no boundaries. The physical transformation of Kalaupapa was nothing short of miraculous, but it was the spiritual resurrection that truly defied human logic. Father Damien understood that while bodies might be decaying, souls could still be made whole. He became a relentless force of nature against the encroaching jungle and the apathy of the outside world. He built sturdy wooden homes to replace the rotting, bug-infested shacks, painting them to combat the overwhelming grayness of despair. He laid pipelines to bring fresh, clean water from the mountains, ending the savage fights over muddy, contaminated streams. He established 2 orphanages, one for boys, one for girls, gathering the abandoned, terrified children into his own arms. He taught them how to play, how to sing, and how to be children again. The feral, lawless wasteland was slowly being forged into a functioning, loving community. But the beating heart of his revolution was the parish of Saint Philomena. The small chapel became the epicenter of the island's newfound pulse. Damien did not just preach to his flock, he integrated them into the very life of the church. He formed a choir, teaching the exiles to sing Gregorian chants and traditional hymns. To hear them was a profound, heartbreaking experience. Their voices were often raspy, their throats ravaged by the disease, and they played instruments with bandaged, fingerless stumps. Yet, when they sang, the music that rose from that condemned peninsula was more triumphant than the grandest choirs in the cathedrals of Europe. It was the sound of human dignity reclaiming its voice from the throat of death. To the government in Honolulu, he was a stubborn, demanding nuisance, constantly writing letters and pleading for bandages, lumber, and basic food rations. He fought fiercely for his people, refusing to let the world simply wash its hands of them. But to the exiles of Molokai, he was father, doctor, carpenter, and savior. He shattered the ultimate barrier of isolation by refusing to keep his distance. He ate from their shared bowls, passed his own smoking pipe among them, and embraced the sick without flinching. He no longer addressed them from the pulpit as "my brethren," but began using a phrase that would echo through history: "we lepers." He had completely, unconditionally united his destiny with theirs, long before the bacteria ever entered his own bloodstream. By refusing to treat them as untouchable, he loved them back to life. For 11 relentless years, Father Damien poured his lifeblood into the volcanic soil of Molokai. He was a whirlwind of ceaseless activity, a solitary beacon burning fiercely against the unrelenting winds of despair. But the grueling physical labor, the constant, intimate exposure to the contagion, and the crushing psychological weight of bearing the daily sorrows of thousands began to wear down even his formidable peasant constitution. He had known the risks from the very first day he stepped off the longboat. The doctors in Honolulu had explicitly warned him that leprosy was infectious, that sustained, unprotected contact was a virtual death sentence. Yet, he had made his choice. He knew that he could not truly love these broken people from a safe, sterile distance. To save the exiles, he had to live entirely among them. To heal their profound spiritual wounds, He had to embrace their horrifying physical reality. The inevitable consequence of his radical, boundary-breaking love was only a matter of time. One evening in December 1884, as the tropical sun dipped below the Pacific horizon and the cool ocean breeze swept through the peninsula, Father Damien prepared to wash his exhausted body. He poured a basin of boiling water to soak his heavily calloused feet. As he submerged his foot into the scalding basin, he felt a strange, unsettling sensation, or rather, a terrifying lack of it. The water was practically boiling, steam rising in thick, blistering clouds, yet his skin registered absolutely no pain. A chilling, deadening numbness had taken root deep within his flesh. It was the classic, undeniable first symptom of the separating sickness. He slowly withdrew his foot, staring at the reddened skin that felt no agony. In that quiet, solitary moment, in the dim, flickering light of his modest wooden rectory, the devastating truth settled heavily upon his shoulders. He was not just the pastor of the lepers anymore. He was one of them. The inclusive phrase he had used so affectionately from the pulpit for over a decade, "we lepers," had suddenly transformed from a profound expression of spiritual solidarity into a harsh biological reality. The terrifying disease he had fought so valiantly in others had finally breached his own physical defenses. For a man of flesh and blood, the realization must have brought a moment of profound human dread. The prospect of the slow, disfiguring decay, the agonizing loss of his physical strength, the impending blindness, and the eventual suffocation. It was a cross far heavier than the towering emerald cliffs of Molokai. Yet, Father Damien did not curse God. He did not pack his meager belongings and demand to be evacuated to a comfortable hospital. Instead, he walked to the altar of Saint Philomena, knelt before the tabernacle, and fully surrendered his breaking body. He later wrote to his superiors with a serene, almost terrifying acceptance, "I am a leper. The Lord has willed that I be afflicted with this disease. May he be blessed for it." The healthy man who had willingly descended into the tomb was now officially, irrevocably bound to it. The sacrifice was absolute. The news of Father Damien's diagnosis did not spread through a formal announcement or a government bulletin. It spread through the air of Kalaupapa like a sacred, somber whisper. When he stood before his congregation at St. Philomena the following Sunday, the atmosphere was thick with a tension that surpassed even the usual heaviness of the peninsula. The people looked up at their shepherd, their eyes searching his familiar face for the telltale signs they knew all too well. When he opened his mouth to speak, he did not offer a theological explanation or a cry for pity. He simply looked at the sea of disfigured faces, his own brothers and sisters in exile, and spoke the words that would seal his legend. "My dear lepers." In that moment, the last thin veil between the priest and the pariah was torn away. He was no longer a visitor from the world of the healthy. He was a permanent resident of the kingdom of the sick. The reaction of the community was a profound, collective outpouring of grief and gratitude. For years, they had wondered why this man stayed, why he touched them, why he didn't fear the wind that carried the contagion. Now they had their answer. He had stayed until the island claimed him. Their love for him, already immense, transformed into something bordering on the divine. They began to care for him with the same tenderness he had shown them. When his hands became too swollen to grip the hammer, dozens of hands reached out to take it from him. When his legs grew heavy and numb, they supported his stride. But Damien did not slow down. If anything, the diagnosis acted as a catalyst, a final signal that his time was short and the work was far from over. He became a man possessed by a holy urgency. The outside world, however, reacted with a mixture of morbid fascination and cold criticism. News reached Europe and America that the Christian martyr of Molokai had finally contracted the disease. Donations began to pour in from across the globe. Monetary gifts from the wealthy, bandages from churches, and letters of admiration from world leaders. But with fame came the stinging barbs of jealousy and judgment. Some officials in Honolulu and certain rival clergymen, perhaps shamed by their own refusal to help, began to circulate cruel rumors. They questioned his hygiene, his motives, and even his morality, suggesting that his contraction of the disease was a sign of divine punishment rather than sacrificial love. Damien felt these arrows deeply, but he refused to retaliate. He chose instead to hide himself in the work, his body becoming a living altar upon which the daily sacrifices of the island were offered. He was becoming a leper among lepers, proving that, while the flesh is corruptible, the spirit forged in the fire of service is absolutely invincible. He was walking the path of the cross, not in theory, but in every agonizing, dragging step across the jagged volcanic rocks of his home. The crucible of Molokai was now burning with an intensity that would have consumed any lesser spirit. By 1886, the separating sickness had moved from a silent intruder to a visible, relentless conqueror of Father Damien's physical frame. His once vigorous peasant features began to thicken and distort into what doctors called facies leontina, the lion-like face. His earlobes grew heavy and distended, his eyebrows fell away, and his voice, once capable of booming across the volcanic valleys, was reduced to a raspy, painful whisper. His hands, the very tools he had used to build a civilization from the ruins of despair, were now stiff, ulcerated, and largely useless for the heavy labor he loved. Yet, as his outer shell crumbled, the light of his inner spirit seemed to burn with a more luminous, almost terrifying clarity. He was a man in a race against time, a builder who knew the sun was setting, and he refused to let a single moment of his remaining strength go to waste. It was during this twilight of his life that God sent angels to the peninsula to ensure the work would survive its creator. For over a decade, Damien had been a solitary warrior, often pleading with his superiors for help that never came. But the world was finally listening. Into the Valley of Death stepped Joseph Ira Dutton, a former American Civil War soldier seeking penance, who would become Damien's right hand and the chronicler of his final years. And perhaps most significantly, the arrival of Mother Marianne Cope and her Sisters of St. Francis brought a new level of grace, hygiene, and maternal order to the orphanages and hospitals. When Damien met Mother Marianne, he saw the answer to 1,000 nights of desperate prayer. He knew then that when he finally laid down his tools, the children of Molokai would not be abandoned. He greeted these newcomers not as a celebrated hero, but as a dying servant, his bandaged hands gesturing toward the unfinished churches and the thousands of souls who still needed a shepherd. But the spiritual combat deepened even as the physical support arrived. The most agonizing wounds were not the ulcers on his skin, but the cold, bureaucratic indifference, and sometimes active hostility from his own religious superiors and the health officials in Honolulu. They were embarrassed by his fame and irritated by his constant demands for the poor. They attempted to restrict his movements and even censored his letters. There were moments of profound, dark loneliness when Damien felt like a pariah even within the church he served. Yet, he found his consolation at the foot of the tabernacle. He often spent his nights in the quiet shadows of St. Philomena, his disfigured face pressed against the cold floor, uniting his agony with the agony in the garden. He realized that to be a true apostle of the lepers, he had to be rejected by the world of the clean, just as his people were. He embraced the insults with the same serene courage with which he embraced the disease. He was becoming a living icon of the suffering Christ, broken in body, rejected by men, but overflowing with a love that was beginning to change the moral conscience of the entire world. He was no longer just a priest. He was a sacrifice. The year was 1889, and the final heavy curtain was beginning to fall on the life of the shepherd of Molokai. The separating sickness, having claimed his skin, his nerves, and his strength, was now moving for the heart of his very being. Father Damien was no longer a man who merely walked among the sick. He was a living map of the disease's ultimate victory over the flesh. His face was a landscape of deep, ashen furrows and painful swellings. His eyes, once bright with the fire of a young missionary, were now clouded, one of them lost to the encroaching darkness of blindness. His voice, which had once filled the valleys with the melodic hymns of his Belgian childhood, was now a hollow, whistling rasp as the leprosy constricted his throat and lungs. He breathed with the labored, heavy rhythm of a man carrying a mountain on his chest. Every movement was a testament to the agony of a body that was literally falling apart. Yet his spirit remained anchored in a peace that surpassed all human understanding. He knew the end was near. He did not speak of death with fear, but with the quiet, weary anticipation of a laborer who had finished his day's work and was simply waiting for the master to call him home. He spent his final weeks in a small, meager bed in his wooden rectory, the very house he had built with his own hands. Even as his physical world shrank to the dimensions of a single room, his spiritual vision encompassed the entire world. He continued to dictate letters, his mind still racing with plans for the orphanages, the water systems, and the souls of his people. He was a captain who refused to leave the bridge until the very last moment. When his fellow priests and the sisters urged him to rest, he would only whisper through cracked, bleeding lips, "It is for the poor. It is for the Lord." He was making his final descent into the valley of the shadow, not as a victim, but as a conqueror of the spirit. One of the most poignant moments of these final days occurred when he looked at his own crippled, ulcerated hands, hands that had baptized thousands, built dozens of structures, and bandaged countless wounds. He smiled a crooked, painful smile and whispered to Brother Dutton, "Look at my hands. They are the hands of a leper, but they are also the hands of a priest. Soon they will be the hands of a saint in the presence of God." He saw his own disfigurement not as a mark of shame, but as the ultimate badge of honor, the uniform of his service. He had become so thoroughly one with his people that he no longer feared the judgment of the clean world. He was a citizen of Molokai, a brother to the outcasts, and a son of the Sacred Hearts. He lay there, a broken vessel, but one that was overflowing with a light so brilliant that it began to illuminate the consciences of people across the oceans. The world was watching the slow, agonizing death of a man, but the heavens were watching the birth of a legend. He was the grain of wheat that had fallen into the earth and died, and the harvest was already beginning to bloom in the hearts of millions. He had given everything: his health, his youth, his beauty, and his breath. And in the eyes of God, he had never been more beautiful. Monday, April 15th, 1889. It was the beginning of Holy Week, the most sacred time in the Christian calendar, when the Church follows the footsteps of the Savior through his passion, death, and resurrection. For the peninsula of Kalaupapa, this particular Holy Week would be etched into the very stones of the volcanic shore. Father Damien, the man who had become the beating heart of the island, was entering his own final agony. He lay in his small, darkened room, his breathing a shallow, rattling struggle against the fluid filling his ravaged lungs. The separating sickness had finished its slow, systematic destruction of his earthly vessel. His face, once the robust face of a Flemish farmer, was now a swollen mask of purpled flesh and open sores, unrecognizable to any who had known him in his youth. Yet, those who knelt by his bedside, Mother Marianne Cope, Brother Dutton, and his fellow priests, reported that a strange, supernatural serenity seemed to radiate from him, as if the light of the next world was already breaking through the cracks of his crumbling body. Outside the rectory, a profound and heavy silence had descended upon the settlement. Hundreds of lepers, men, women, and children with bandaged limbs and hollow eyes, gathered in the dirt paths, sitting in quiet, weeping vigils. There was no rioting, no lawlessness, and no despair, but a deep collective grief that only children feel when they realize their father is leaving them. They remembered the man who had arrived when they were being treated like animals, the man who had built their coffins, washed their sores, and told them they were beloved children of God. They watched the flickering light in his window, knowing that when that light went out, the world would lose one of its most courageous souls. The man who had spent 16 years turning their living tomb into a community of love was now preparing to occupy a grave among them. As the morning sun began to climb over the towering emerald cliffs, casting long, dramatic shadows across the settlement, Father Damien took his final breaths. His last words were not a cry of pain or a plea for relief, but a quiet, whispered sigh of completion. How sweet it is to die as a child of the Sacred Hearts. At 8 a.m., the struggle ended. The weary laborer had finally laid down his tools. The news moved through the crowds like a somber wave. The priest, who had become a leper to save lepers, was dead. They buried him the next day at the foot of the very same pandanus tree where he had spent his first night on the island 16 years earlier. The circle was complete. He had started with a stone for a pillow beneath that tree, and he ended in a wooden coffin beneath its roots. He was laid to rest in the middle of the graveyard he had tended for so long, surrounded by the thousands of his children who had gone before him. He had not just died for them, he had died as one of them, proving forever that there is no darkness so deep that love cannot find a way to enter and transform it. The shepherd was gone, but the island would never be the same again. The death of Damien was not the end of Molokai. It was the birth of its redemption. As the news of his passing rippled across the oceans, it triggered a global awakening of conscience that no government decree or religious bureaucracy could suppress. The man who had been a nuisance to the powerful in life became an unstoppable force in death. Inspired by his sacrifice, the world began to look at the separating sickness not as a divine curse to be shunned, but as a human tragedy to be healed. The Damien of Molokai phenomenon sparked a revolution in medical ethics and missionary work. It gave rise to a new generation of doctors, nurses, and volunteers who, like him, chose to step across the barriers of fear to serve the untouchable. He had torn down the invisible walls of stigma long before the physical walls of the colony ever fell. In the years that followed, the work he began under the pandanus tree flourished into a global legacy. Mother Marianne Cope and Joseph Dutton ensured that the dignity Damien had restored to the island was never lost again. In 1936, at the request of the Belgian government, his remains were repatriated to his homeland. greeted by kings and commoners alike with the honors reserved for the greatest of heroes. Yet, the people of Hawaii insisted that his heart, the heart that had beaten so fiercely for the outcasts, remained spiritually anchored in the soil of Molokai. In 2009, when he was officially canonized as Saint Damien by the Church, it was merely the world catching up to what the lepers of Kalaupapa had known for over a century, that they had been walked home by a saint. Today, the name of Damien of Molokai is no longer spoken in whispers of fear, but in anthems of triumph. His story serves as an inexhaustible spring for anyone facing the leprosies of the modern age, the plagues of loneliness, indifference, and systemic abandonment. He teaches us that the most profound healing does not always come from a needle or a pill, but from the simple, terrifying, and beautiful act of presence. He reminds us that no one is truly untouchable if there is someone brave enough to touch them. His life was the ultimate bridge built over the abyss of isolation, a bridge made of his own broken body and surrendered spirit. When you feel forgotten in your own valley of shadows, remember the farmer's son who became a king of the outcasts. When you are tempted to look away from the suffering of others, remember the man who smoked a pipe to endure the stench just so he could offer a kiss of peace. When the world tells you that your life is measured by what you acquire, Damien's empty hands and ulcerated skin testify that a life is truly measured by what it gives away. The leper priest still walks among us, his raspy voice echoing through the corridors of time, calling us to find our own Molokai, not to escape the world, but to enter into its deepest wounds and bring the light of the Sacred Hearts. Christ before him, Christ behind him, Christ in every broken face he kissed. The priest who became a leper is now a light that will never be extinguished. Saint Damien of Molokai, Apostle of the Outcasts, pray for us.